Hi, everyone. Welcome to our very first Friday Coffee Talk. Previously, in our Affordable Translation series, we talked about the importance of translation for your business, ways to do it with a budget in mind. Today, we're switching gears to a slightly different angle and interviewing our new interpreting manager, Sam, about his experience in interpretation and specific things that we should keep in mind when looking for an interpreter. So again, my name is Ashton Bitton. This is Stacy Brown.
Hi.
And Sam Espindola, our brand new
Hello.
interpreting manager. Awesome. Okay, so Sam, or actually I'm going to switch things over to Stacy and she'll give us a little bit of a intro before we start asking Sam some questions. So Stacy, take it away.
Thanks, Ashton, and thanks everybody for watching our video on YouTube today. So we're here, I mean, really interpreting is part of kind of a bigger issue going on, and we've talked about this in our last video series about language access. And language access is primarily the act of providing meaningful access to your service or product for anyone, whether including your limited English proficients, which are people who really don't have a good understanding of the English language that may benefit from your services. So, you know, it's really something anyone in the nonprofit sector is thinking about and wanting to address. And, you know, it's something that MindLink has recently been getting, I feel like, drawn to, and I think part of that is because there's such a need right now to provide this for immigrants that are here in the U.S. And, you know, there are problems in the sense that people who don't have that access to things like, you know, education information, you know, if their kids are in school, or food banks, or certain, you know, services that they could be taken advantage of. But without language access, they tend to feel very isolated. And so that's why having interpretation as part of providing that language access is so important. And so, you know, like I said, you know, with MindLink, we have been feeling more called to this, and we are answering the call. And that's a big part of why, you know, Sam has come on board, and we're looking at really building this service. So we're so grateful. We're so happy for you, Sam, for us. We're happy for us that you come on board, and you're going to be, you know, working with us to kind of build this service for MindLink. Mm-hmm. So we're excited to get to know you better today. And yeah, so we have a few questions to kind of pick your brain so we can learn more.
Just a little bit.
Go ahead.
All right, excellent. So I guess first questions first, how did you get into interpreting?
Well, it all started back in the summer of 2015. I was right out of school of my freshman year in college. I was looking for a summer job. I thought, I need something that pays a lot of money, doesn't take up a lot of my time. You know, it's really hard to find a job like that. And of course, it's a dream job for any college guy to find a job that pays a lot, doesn't take up a lot of your time, because that's not, you need a lot of money and you have very little time usually. Exactly. So I was lucky to find one. I found a local interpreting and translation agency that was looking for an interpreter in my area, and I applied. I went through some testing and passed with reasonably high numbers, interestingly. Nice. And that's the way I started, and I loved it so much that I haven't stopped since.
Very good. And how long have you been interpreting?
A total of 3 years and 1 month.
Okay, wonderful. Excellent. You're sticking with it. Good. So I guess what would you say your experience has been? I know previously you talked about a little bit of the mechanics that goes into interpretation and translation. Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So in contrast to translation, interpreting is the verbal holding of ideas, grabbing of ideas from one language and translating or interpreting them into the target language. And that takes a great deal of skill, because being bilingual, you would think that that comes very naturally, when actually it takes a bit of skill and dedication. You have to have a good depth of language knowledge of both the original language and the target language as well. One big difference between interpreters, trained interpreters, qualified interpreters, or even certified interpreters versus just a bilingual person is that we have training. We take extensive training and make sure that we are actually professionals in the industry. We're transparent. We know the role of an interpreter. So the way it works usually is that you look to convey not only you don't convey words, you convey ideas with interpreting. You also convey expressions. A lot of times there's a lot of people that are very verbal with their words, or sometimes they're just very facial expressive, or even with their hands they signal things. As interpreters, we're trained to not only interpret ideas, we're also trained to interpret body language, which is a big part of our duties. So with that, it takes a lot of knowledge to be able to do it meaningfully and quickly on the fly. We don't have time to stop like translators do and look it up on Google to see and make sure that we're doing an accurate job. We have to know that very quickly, bring it to mind.
Not that our translators use Google. Just want to interject that.
Yeah.
Some might.
Absolutely.
But not the MindLink ones.
No.
Absolutely. So trained translators, I'm sure they use specific tools that make sure that they do the best job possible. With interpreters, we unfortunately don't have that cushion of time. So we have to make sure that we are prepared way beforehand, even years before we start exercising our careers. One of the easiest, and I think questions that I've received before from Stacy specifically, is how interpreters manage to divide those two languages between speaking English cleanly, if it's English, and then the other language, for example, Spanish.
And Sam, before you get into that, I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you became fluent in Spanish and English.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So, as many interpreters, usually we have a very diverse background, as it is with me. I was born here in the States, went to elementary school, then I moved to Mexico and lived there for about 7 years. Completed middle school and high school there. Came back to the States again to complete, and I'm still working on completing my bachelor's degree. So I have a lot of. I've studied abroad. I've studied here. I was already a heritage speaker when I moved to Mexico, but obviously living in the country and in the culture really gave me a very meaningful, in-depth knowledge of the language, more than I would have reached here. So that really gave me a competitive edge to become an interpreter a lot more smoothly than I think I would have otherwise.
Well, your English is you sound like a native with English. I'm sure you do with Spanish as well, although I have to trust you on that. But it's true. I mean, going back to kind of where you were getting before, I'm kind of curious about when I was in college just a couple years ago, I became fluent in Italian. And there were many times when, not that I didn't really use it for interpretation formally, but of course, anytime a friend or family member was visiting me, I found myself in that position where I was, interpreting what my Italian friends were saying for my American friends. And there were many times I mixed it up where I was staring at my American friend and saying a very complete and well thought out thought, and they looked at me like they didn't know what the heck I was talking about, and I realized, oh, I was using the wrong language. Sorry, let's try that again in the right language. So how do you avoid those kind of scenarios as a professional interpreter where you keep things really straight in your head, and what are the kind of mechanics you have to do to prepare for that?
A lot of the preparation that has to come in when you become an interpreter, once you begin performing, usually you can think of it as as a final test. You should have done your homework way before then to become the interpreter. But obviously, scenarios like the one you were facing are actually excellent practice sessions to eventually become an interpreter. Just using day-to-day language between friends in a very relaxed scene, I find this usually very good to begin exercising that division of language in your mind.
So a lot of practice is what you're saying?
Absolutely, a lot of practice. And one of the things that I've found personally helpful is that now as an interpreter, I'm obviously very careful to, once I think of a word that is not commonly used in one language or in the other that I don't know, once I identify that word, for example, if it's glasses, in Spanish it would be lentes, I make a mental note of that word and I exercise it, lentes, glasses. And then I try to make a mental picture of that word in my mind to make sure that it actually remains there. Because to give you a little bit of an idea, there's been studies done about language and how the brain processes language. Interestingly enough, you think differently when you think in another language.
Mm-hmm.
So the way the brain works, there's neurons that fire every time you remember of a certain word in Spanish, but a different part of your brain fires up when you use the English word of that same object. So what you want to do as an interpreter is make sure that the brain can fire up both of these neurons at once, so you can recall that word instantaneously when you're speaking either one language or another.
Very cool.
Yeah. I mean, I just think about like one of the issues is, I hear myself repeating. Okay, but one of the issues that you hear is people bringing their kids to do the interpretation for like a medical appointment, or and just like knowing and hearing from you what it takes to do this on a professional level. You think, gosh, how do people put their kids in that situation? Like, it's probably very stressful, but the kids tend to be more bilingual because language is easier to acquire at a younger age. And so, yeah, I think it's kind of a good lesson learned how important hiring a professional is and being able to provide the access. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And on that note, Stacy, there was a survey done recently by a local organization here in Oregon. Let's see here. I have it here. What the organization is. I have it right here. Give me 1 second. It's called the 2016 Southern Washington Oregon Language Access Survey, done by the OHCIA. They did this survey in 2016. Interestingly enough, 80% of the interpreting services provided here in Oregon are provided by bilingual people. So that is a bit concerning, because
like,
a lot of times what happens is
80% are provided by family members, or
by bilingual staff members, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that in terms of quality of interpreting, it is concerning, because bilingual staff members are usually not trained as interpreters. So that opens the door to a lot of potential danger of quality of service, whatever it may be, especially in healthcare, even that you're exposing yourself to a lot of liability. Whereas with qualified interpreters, you would not have that issue.
Yeah, and that's probably a whole coffee talk we could do, right? Because
maybe next week. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, quality is such a big, yeah. Anyway, so that's awesome. And, you're doing great work. And, at MindLink, we're really excited to be able to work with our clients to provide this really valuable service too. So
definitely.
Thank you. And thanks to our viewers today.
Yeah, absolutely. But one final question for Sam. What would you say your one best tip would be for new linguists who are trying to break into the interpretation scene?
I think for new interpreters, one of the biggest fears they would have is to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
Usually they are concerned and afraid that, oh, I'm not going to forget that word. I don't know everything. Well, I'll tell you, not all interpreters know every single word that comes up in a job. It's happened to me. It's happened to the most experienced interpreters, I'm sure. You will get over it. There are skills that you can develop to make sure that doesn't happen as often as when you begin, but it can be overcome, and you can become part of this great, exciting industry.
Awesome. Like you may not know the word for glasses, but you may know how to say, you know, the thing that you wear on your face that helps your vision.
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes it gets
the works, you know, it gets the point across. It's okay.
Absolutely. The job of an interpreter is to get ideas across usually, and if you have to do face gestures or hand gestures, you can even do that. You know, it's not the best maybe option, but hey, you know, your job is to communicate groups, and if you do that, then you're doing your job.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for your interview today, Sam. It's been very informative.
And if you guys who are watching have more questions for Sam, put them in the comments below.
Definitely. We can respond. Awesome. Perfect. All right. Well, do we have any other questions?
Check out more on mindlinkresources.com, and we have blog posts talking about this topic, and we have a lot more materials coming out. So stay in touch.
Stay tuned. We'll bring more. All right. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Adios.
Bye.
Ciao.